The grand chandelier cast golden reflections across the ballroom, illuminating the chatter of influential executives and the soft clink of champagne glasses. Among them stood Lena, a young assistant, her hands trembling slightly beneath the polished cuff of her new blazer. She had worked tirelessly to earn her recent promotion, and tonight, she hoped, would be the night she finally made an impression. Gathering her courage, she approached the CEO, a man known for his sharp mind and even sharper demeanor. "Good evening, sir," she said, extending her hand with a hopeful smile. He glanced down at her, eyes cold and unreadable, and brusquely turned away, offering no acknowledgement. Her heart sank. Around her, the room continued to buzz with laughter and networking, but all she could feel was the sting of rejection. Confused and shaken, she walked away, her mind racing. Why would he treat me like this? The stage was set, the question lingered, and the story had begun. Lena grew up in a small, sun-drenched neighborhood, where the streets buzzed with children's laughter and the scent of fresh bread from corner bakeries. Her family's modest home, with peeling paint and a creaky wooden staircase, had always been filled with warmth, love, and quiet determination. Her parents worked tirelessly, her mother juggling long shifts as a seamstress, her father laboring as a taxi driver, so that Lena and her siblings could chase opportunities they themselves had never been afforded. From an early age, Lena understood the value of hard work. She learned to stretch a few coins into a week's groceries, to find beauty in simple moments, and to find hope where others might see despair. Her notebooks were filled with dreams of a life beyond the narrow lanes of her neighborhood, offices buzzing with ideas, city lights reflecting off glass towers, and a chance to make a difference. Among the trinkets on her family's shelves was a small, faded photograph of a young boy she could never forget. His bright eyes and solemn smile held a story untold, a memory whispered through generations. Her grandmother would occasionally mention him with a soft sigh, never revealing the full tale. Lena often wondered about the boy, feeling a quiet connection she couldn't explain, a sense that one day paths would cross in ways she couldn't yet imagine. Despite the hardships, Lena's optimism never wavered. She helped her mother mend torn clothes, tutored younger children in the neighborhood, and found small ways to uplift those around her. Her resilience became her quiet armor, preparing her for the challenges she would face in the world beyond her home. Years of late-night studying, small jobs, and relentless determination eventually brought her to the heart of the corporate city she had always dreamed of. Each promotion was a hard-earned victory, a reminder of the sacrifices of her family and the dreams that had fueled her journey. Yet, even as she entered the polished conference rooms and glittering offices, the echoes of her humble beginnings stayed with her, grounding her in humility and compassion. But tonight, standing in that grand ballroom, the sting of the CEO's refusal cut sharply against her hard-won confidence. She felt a familiar knot of doubt creep in, the kind that had once whispered that her efforts might never be enough. And yet, beneath that doubt, a spark remained, an unshakable determination. She remembered the stories of perseverance her parents had shared, the lessons from a childhood shaped by love and sacrifice, and she made a silent promise. She would not let one cold gesture define her worth. As she stepped away from the bustling room, the photograph in her mind, the boy whose eyes seemed to hold a secret, lingered. Little did she know that silent connection, buried in the past, was about to resurface in ways that would change everything. The CEO's office was perched atop the city's tallest tower, a glass and steel fortress that reflected the sun's afternoon glare like a crown of light. From this height, he could see the pulse of the city below, cars snaking through streets, office workers scurrying like ants, the hum of life he had long since transcended. Yet inside, the room was silent, almost austere, furnished with minimalist elegance. A polished mahogany desk, leather chairs that seemed more throne than seating, and shelves lined with awards that gleamed coldly under the soft spotlights. He stood near the floor-to-ceiling window, hands clasped behind his back, eyes tracing the horizon as if searching for something just out of reach. Alexander Kane, the man everyone whispered about in boardrooms and lunchrooms alike, had earned a reputation as a shrewd, uncompromising leader, a visionary whose decisions could make or break companies overnight. But there was another side unseen, hidden behind layers of meticulous control and unyielding professionalism. Employees often described him as aloof, even unapproachable. Rumors swirled of his exacting standards, his sharp critiques that left executives trembling, and his tendency to dismiss those who failed to meet his high expectations. Meetings with Alexander were legendary in their intensity. One wrong phrase could earn a pointed look or a curt dismissal, a cold reminder that in his world, time and competence were currency. And yet, despite the fear he inspired, there was a precision, a deliberate rhythm to his coldness. Every action calculated, every distance maintained. It was as though he had learned early that intimacy was a vulnerability he could never afford. On this particular afternoon, he was reviewing quarterly reports, the clicking of his pen echoing in the cavernous office. An assistant knocked lightly and entered, carrying a stack of documents. She hesitated for a moment, aware that any misstep could alter her career trajectory in an instant. "Sir, the proposal from the new client," she began. He didn't turn, his voice low and measured. "Place it on the desk. I'll review it when I see fit. Efficiency, not enthusiasm, dictates results." The words weren't cruel, yet the weight of them was suffocating, the subtle sting of dismissal undeniable. Those who had worked under him for years had learned not to read hostility into his tone. It was simply how he operated. He had always believed that showing mercy or warmth at the wrong time could undermine authority. And yet behind the polished veneer of the boardroom, behind the towering empire he had built from ruthless ambition, there was a flicker of something else, an unspoken ache, a memory he carried in silence. It was a memory of a childhood spent in quiet isolation, of afternoons wandering empty streets and waiting for attention that rarely came. Alexander had been bright, capable, and painfully aware of the loneliness that trailed him like a shadow. Perhaps it was this early sense of being overlooked that shaped his relentless pursuit of power, the fortress of accomplishments that now surrounded him. And perhaps deep down, he longed for something he never quite had, a connection, a recognition that transcended wealth and status. Even in his personal life, Alexander maintained distance. Few knew of his rare moments of vulnerability, a photograph tucked into a drawer, a faint note from a mentor long gone, a single memory that occasionally surfaced in the quiet of the night. Those who tried to pierce the layers of authority often found themselves met with polite deflection, leaving them to wonder what lay beneath the ice of his reputation. As the day stretched into evening, Alexander received the report from the corporate gala, a brief note on the staff attendance and performance, including a mention of Lena, the young assistant whose handshake he had refused earlier. He skimmed her name, eyes narrowing ever so slightly. Something about her had struck him, not in the way employees normally drew attention, but as a spark of unfamiliar resolve, a subtle courage he hadn't encountered in years. His expression remained impassive, but his mind, ever calculating, began to trace a pattern, a memory from long ago that he could not yet fully place. The contrast between her humility and the world he commanded unsettled him, stirring questions he had long avoided. Back in the gala hall, Lena replayed the moment in her mind, trying to make sense of the CEO's brusque rejection. She could not have known the silent storm she had provoked, a storm built from decades of carefully constructed walls, of personal pain transformed into authority. Yet something in her demeanor, something in the way she carried herself despite humiliation, hinted at a connection he would soon realize. As Alexander returned to his reports, the office lights casting long shadows across the room, the tension between past and present began to thrum faintly, imperceptibly, like the first notes of a story waiting to unfold. The stage was set. The undercurrent of mystery and hidden connection would soon draw them into a narrative neither could anticipate, where humility and authority would collide, and the ghosts of childhood memories would finally surface. The hum of fluorescent lights filled the office as Lena sat at her desk, fingers poised over the keyboard, reviewing another project brief. The open-plan office was a kingdom of quiet ambition, but to her, it often felt like a battlefield. Colleagues moved with effortless ease through the corridors, exchanging polished smiles and insider jokes she had yet to penetrate. Each interaction reminded her of the invisible line separating her from the upper echelons, the circle of influence she desperately wanted to be part of. Her tasks, though numerous and crucial, often went unnoticed. The meticulous reports she prepared were skimmed hastily. The presentations she rehearsed for hours met with polite nods that barely concealed indifference. And then there were the microaggressions. The senior manager who interrupted her mid-sentence during a team meeting, the assistant who joked about her small-town background, the whispered criticisms in corridors where she thought she was unseen. Each slight was subtle, almost imperceptible to outsiders, but to Lena they stung sharply, echoing the sting of the CEO's refusal at the gala. Yet despite the weight of constant judgment, Lena persisted. Her resilience had been honed long before she stepped into this corporate world. She greeted every challenge with quiet determination, every small success with humility. She often stayed late, refining proposals, double-checking numbers, and offering insights she knew could improve outcomes. And sometimes, in those fleeting moments, her compassion shone through. She would help a junior colleague struggling with a presentation or notice a mistake in a report that no one else had seen. These acts were small, almost invisible, but they marked her as someone whose worth extended beyond her resume. One afternoon, during a tense boardroom briefing, Lena noticed a discrepancy in the financial forecasts. Her instincts screamed that the overlooked data could affect the next quarter's projections. She raised her hand hesitantly, drawing a skeptical glance from the CEO. "Sir, if I may," she began, "I think the marketing numbers from last quarter might need reevaluation. There's a margin here that doesn't align with previous trends." Alexander's eyes flicked up, sharp and assessing, and for a moment the room held its breath. A few colleagues shifted uncomfortably, sensing the potential fallout of challenging him. He leaned back, fingers steepled. "Explain," he said, voice controlled but edged with curiosity. Lena presented her observations clearly, carefully. By the end, the room was silent, and a subtle nod from Alexander acknowledged her insight. It was brief, almost dismissive, but enough to hint that beneath the cold exterior there was recognition. Yet recognition came rarely, and Lena knew better than to expect praise. She returned to her desk, the tension of the day weighing heavily on her shoulders. She couldn't help but wonder why her efforts, her insight, often went unnoticed. Why did someone so brilliant, so capable, seem incapable of warmth or acknowledgement? The contrast between her humility and dedication and the CEO's detached authority gnawed at her. Around her, the office continued its rhythmic dance of power and influence, but Lena felt like a lone figure on the sidelines, striving to prove herself not just for career advancement, but for the validation she knew she deserved. Still, within the frustration, a spark of curiosity was forming. She began to observe Alexander more closely, the way he reviewed documents with precision, the subtle gestures that betrayed a deeper thought process, the rare moments when a fleeting expression hinted at an unspoken story. She sensed that his indifference was more than arrogance. It was a mask, a carefully constructed shield hiding a past she could only begin to imagine. By the end of the week, Lena made a quiet decision. She would not allow herself to be defined by microaggressions or overlooked contributions. Instead, she would seek to understand the man behind the cold authority, to find the connection that seemed just out of reach. Perhaps in unraveling his world, she might discover the link between their lives, a link that destiny, in ways she could not yet see, was preparing to reveal. Her eyes lingered on the office's panoramic windows, the city lights beginning to sparkle like 1,000 tiny stories waiting to be told. And for the first time, she felt a determined hope. If she could navigate this labyrinth of power and indifference, she might just uncover the secret that bound their lives together. That evening, Lena returned home, the city's skyline fading behind her as the car weaved through familiar streets. The comforting scent of her mother's cooking greeted her, but her mind was restless, still replaying the day's events. The cold glance of the CEO, the microaggressions at work, and the faint glimmer of recognition in his eyes when she had dared to point out the numbers' discrepancy. She needed a moment away from the polished offices, a reminder of the roots that had grounded her through years of struggle. After dinner, she wandered into the living room, where a beam of soft light fell across an old wooden chest that had belonged to her grandmother. Dust motes danced in the glow as she lifted the lid, revealing a carefully stacked assortment of family albums, yellowed letters, and forgotten trinkets. She ran her fingers over the covers, pausing at an album that seemed heavier than the rest, its leather binding worn by decades of careful handling. She opened it gently, flipping through pages filled with sepia-toned images. Birthdays in modest backyards, family picnics by the river, and neighbors whose faces had faded from memory. A smile tugged at her lips as she lingered on each photograph, feeling the warmth of days gone by. Then she stopped. There, tucked between two pages, was a photograph that made her breath catch. A young boy, no older than 10 or 11, stood shyly at the edge of a neighborhood gathering, eyes wide, expression serious yet soft. Lena's heart skipped a beat. There was something eerily familiar about him, the sharpness in his gaze, the set of his jaw. She turned the photo over, reading the faint handwritten note on the back. Alex, summer '95, neighbor's picnic. Her pulse quickened. Alex, Alexander Kane? Could it be the same boy who now commanded towering offices and international influence? She leaned closer, studying the face. The resemblance was undeniable, the same eyes that seemed to pierce through the photograph, the same quiet intensity that she had glimpsed in the CEO's gaze just days ago. Lena's mind raced. Alexander had grown up far from the glimmering towers of the city, yet perhaps their paths had crossed without her even realizing it. Her parents had always spoken of the neighborhood kids, the ones who needed a little help, a little kindness, and sometimes a watchful hand. Could it be that her family had once offered support to the very boy who now wielded power in the corporate world? The thought was dizzying, surreal, a bridge connecting her past to the present in a way she hadn't anticipated. She gently ran her fingers over the photograph, recalling stories her grandmother had whispered during quiet evenings. Stories of a boy who was brilliant but reserved, often overlooked by adults yet fiercely loyal to those who had shown him kindness. Lena remembered her mother mentioning a young boy who would sometimes linger by their home, shy but polite, taking in the laughter and warmth he had rarely known. At the time, she had filed it away as a charming memory, never imagining it could one day hold such significance. Now the weight of the connection pressed upon her chest. A chill ran down her spine, but it was not fear, it was awe. Could fate have intertwined their lives decades ago only for the collision to occur in the grand offices and glittering gala events of today? The coincidence seemed too precise, almost cinematic, yet the evidence was tangible. The photograph, the familiar eyes, the faint, lingering memory in her family's stories. She sat back on the couch, the album resting in her lap, staring at the ceiling as questions swirled. What did this mean for her? For him? For the moments of distance, misunderstanding, and authority she had endured in recent weeks? And more importantly, what role had her family unknowingly played in shaping the man who now seemed so unapproachable, yet whose past was somehow tied to her own? For the first time in weeks, a spark of curiosity overpowered frustration. Perhaps the CEO's coldness, his distance, was not mere arrogance. It was the armor of a past she was only beginning to understand. And perhaps, in discovering this connection, she might find the key to bridging the gap between humility and authority, between past and present. Lena closed the album slowly, her mind alive with possibilities. Destiny, it seemed, had begun to write the next chapter, and she could feel, deep in her chest, that it would change everything. The night air was still as Lena traced her fingers across the faded photograph, the glow of the living room lamp casting a warm halo around her. Suddenly, memories she had long tucked away began to surface, as if the photograph had unlocked a door to the past. She remembered a summer afternoon decades ago when she was barely 10. Her parents had prepared lemonade and sandwiches for a small neighborhood picnic, a simple act of kindness that drew in kids from nearby homes. Among them was a quiet boy who lingered at the edge, hesitant to join the laughter, his eyes wary but observant. Lena's mother had called him over, offering a smile and a sandwich, and he had accepted it with a shy nod, the faintest flicker of relief crossing his face. That boy, Alexander, had remained on the outskirts, unnoticed by most, yet marked by her family's small gestures of warmth. Meanwhile, in the towering glass offices of the present, Alexander's current self remained stoic, reviewing projections and memos with surgical precision. The cold blue light of the computer screens reflected off his sharp features, mirroring the distance he maintained from the world. Yet beneath the disciplined exterior, the memory of small kindnesses, of quiet acceptance in a time of loneliness, had left an indelible mark. It explained the armor, the meticulous control, and the silent yearning he carried for genuine connection. The contrast was striking, the golden warmth of Lena's childhood memories versus the sterile austerity of Alexander's office. Lena realized how much those small moments had shaped him, just as her family's modest guidance had shaped her own resilience. She began to see the collision of past and present not as coincidence, but as destiny. Her mind wandered to other fleeting encounters she had once overheard at home. Her grandmother speaking softly of the bright boy with solemn eyes. Her father recalling how he had helped carry heavy groceries for the neighbor's children. Little threads of human connection, invisible at the time, now wove themselves into a tapestry that tied her to Alexander in ways she could scarcely believe. The realization struck Lena with quiet intensity. The CEO who had seemed so indifferent, so unreachable, had once been the same vulnerable child who had unknowingly brushed against the kindness of her family. And in that instant, she understood that the distance she had felt between them was not merely professional decorum. It was history, armor forged by life's harsh lessons. A surge of determination welled within her. This was no longer about proving herself in the corporate hierarchy or seeking recognition for her hard work. This was about acknowledging a shared humanity, about bridging a gap forged by time, circumstance, and unspoken stories. Lena closed her eyes, imagining a future where the past and present could meet, where curiosity and courage might open a door long left unopened. She knew, deep in her heart, that the next step required more than skill or ambition. It required empathy, intuition, and the willingness to reach across the divide. With that resolve, she rose from the couch, the photograph clutched gently in her hands. The warmth of the memory lingered, illuminating her path. She would act differently now, not just as an employee, but as someone who understood the depth behind the person who had once turned her away. The story of their intertwined past was no longer a secret. It was a quiet invitation to change, to connection, and perhaps to reconciliation. The next morning, Lena arrived at the office with a quiet determination. The sting of the gala lingered, but she had resolved that her approach would not be reactive. It would be thoughtful, deliberate. She observed Alexander from a distance as he entered his office, his presence commanding yet distant, as though a barrier of glass separated him from everyone else. She started with subtle gestures, organizing reports he might need, preparing summaries of complex projects with precision, and anticipating questions before they were asked. Each act was small, almost imperceptible, but carried the weight of her attention to detail and sincerity. Her coworkers noticed, whispering doubts and skepticism. "Why bother?" one muttered. "He'll never notice you." Lena ignored the murmurs, focusing instead on the careful balance between humility and competence. A week passed, punctuated by small victories and quiet frustrations. One afternoon, Alexander summoned her into his office, not with warmth, but with curiosity that shimmered just beneath his practiced neutrality. "I noticed your analysis on the Henderson project," he said, his voice calm but measured. "Some of your insights contradict the initial forecast. Explain." Lena explained clearly and concisely, her voice steady despite the familiar tension she felt in his presence. She highlighted overlooked details, presented solutions, and suggested a minor adjustment that could save the company thousands. As she spoke, she caught something she hadn't expected. A subtle shift in his posture, a slight furrow of his brow, not of disapproval, but of consideration. For the first time, the CEO was listening, truly listening. Outside the office, whispers of this interaction rippled through the staff. Some were incredulous, others quietly impressed. Lena returned to her desk, heart racing with cautious hope. She sensed that the gap between them was beginning to narrow, though the distance was far from bridged. Then a small but significant moment occurred. While arranging a stack of folders on Alexander's desk, her hand brushed against a decorative paperweight, a finely carved miniature globe. She recognized it instantly. It was nearly identical to a gift her father had once given to a young boy in the neighborhood years ago, a token of encouragement, humility, and curiosity. The familiarity struck her like a jolt. Alexander noticed her pause and followed her gaze. For a fleeting moment, his expression softened, subtle but unmistakable, as if a memory had been awakened. He reached for the globe, turning it carefully in his hands, and a shadow of recognition crossed his face. Lena held her breath, sensing the invisible thread connecting past and present. In that silent exchange, warmth met rigidity. Her small gesture, her attention to detail, her respect for his world, had opened the tiniest crack in the armor he had so meticulously constructed. And yet, the story of their shared past was still unspoken, lingering just out of reach, waiting for the right moment to surface. As Lena left his office, she felt a mixture of hope and apprehension. The CEO was still distant, still formidable, but now there was possibility. The tension that had defined their interactions began to shift, and the audience could sense that the narrative was poised for its emotional pivot, a revelation that would connect childhood, destiny, and unacknowledged humanity. The stage was set. Small acts of courage and subtle insight had begun to dismantle the walls of indifference. The next chapter, Lena knew, would reveal the truth that had been waiting decades to resurface. The office was quiet, sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, dust motes dancing in golden beams. Alexander sat at his desk, fingers lightly tracing the carved globe. A memory long buried stirred in his mind, a small boy, shy and wary, standing at a neighborhood picnic, accepting a humble gift from a family that had treated him with kindness when few others did. His breath caught. The recognition hit like a wave. The boy was him. The family had been Lena's. Lena, sensing the shift, approached cautiously. "Sir," she began, voice steady yet soft, "I know our past interactions have been difficult. Alexander lifted his hand, stopping her, but his usual coldness had vanished, replaced by vulnerability. "No," he said, voice trembling slightly. "It's not you, it's me. I've carried walls for so long, walls I thought protected me. I see now I failed to recognize you, to recognize what your family once showed me." His eyes glistened, the first cracks of emotion fully visible. Slow motion seemed to fill the room, the way sunlight caught Lena's expression, the tremor of disbelief and relief in her eyes. Tears welled, glistening like morning dew as the weight of decades collapsed into this single moment. Alexander continued, voice low but sincere. "I apologize for the coldness, the indifference, for letting past fears and old armor dictate my actions. You deserved none of it." Lena's heart swelled. She stepped closer, gently placing a hand on the desk between them. "Sir, or Alexander," she whispered, "I never wanted recognition. I just wanted to understand." A silence followed, filled with unspoken acknowledgement. The tension that had defined their interactions melted, replaced by a profound understanding. Childhood kindness, long forgotten yet never erased, had resurfaced to reshape their present. The CEO and the young woman who had once faced his indifference now shared a connection that transcended office hierarchies, titles, and pride. As the camera of the mind lingers on their faces, the softening of authority, the courage behind humility, viewers feel the catharsis. The underdog and the elite, past and present, vulnerability and strength, finally meeting. The revelation was complete, the emotional pivot achieved. The path forward was clear. A relationship rebuilt, trust restored, and a new chapter waiting to be written. The office, usually a place of brisk efficiency and quiet tension, seemed lighter that afternoon. Sunlight spilled across the polished floors, catching on the brass handles of filing cabinets and the gleaming surface of Alexander's desk. There was a subtle shift in the air, almost imperceptible, but those who looked closely would notice the difference. A warmth replacing the cold, calculated authority that had long defined the space. Lena entered the office, a mixture of anticipation and calm resolve in her steps. Alexander rose to greet her, not with the stiff formality of before, but with a genuine smile, quiet yet filled with acknowledgement. "Lena," he said, voice softer than she had ever heard, "thank you for your patience, your insight, and for reminding me what really matters." Her heart lifted. She had never sought praise, but hearing sincerity in his words validated years of resilience, determination, and compassion. "It was never about recognition," she replied gently. "It was about understanding and maybe helping you see what my family once tried to show. A little kindness can go a long way." In that moment, the roles that had defined them for so long, CEO versus assistant, power versus humility, shifted. The elite, imposing figure of Alexander Kane was no longer untouchable. His humanity shone through, tempered by gratitude and awareness. And Lena, the once overlooked underdog, stood tall, her courage and empathy now undeniable. They shared a silent acknowledgement of mutual respect, a bridge built from understanding and shared history. Outside the office, colleagues noticed the transformation. Whispers spread through the floors, astonishment, admiration, even envy. People who had dismissed Lena's efforts now looked on with renewed respect. Her subtle gestures, her unwavering patience, had not only transformed her relationship with the CEO, but also subtly reshaped the corporate culture around them. It was a ripple effect, small acts of courage and empathy proving more powerful than force or authority. Alexander, for his part, began to make changes too. Meetings were no longer exercises in intimidation, but platforms for collaboration. Employees sensed his attentiveness, the genuine care beneath the once impenetrable exterior. And though the city below continued its relentless rhythm, the office had become a space where humanity and professionalism could coexist, a place where kindness and competence were no longer at odds. For Lena, the resolution was deeply personal. She had faced rejection, indifference, and microaggressions, yet she had remained steadfast, guided by the values instilled in her by her family. The reconciliation was more than professional. It was the fulfillment of a moral arc that had begun decades earlier in the quiet generosity of a childhood home. As the day drew to a close, the sunlight casting long golden streaks across the office, Lena and Alexander shared a final moment of understanding. No words were necessary. History had spoken, lessons had been learned, and a foundation had been laid for trust, respect, and perhaps even friendship. The story of indifference and authority had transformed into one of empathy, courage, and redemption. The audience feels the warmth, the satisfaction, the completeness of a journey that began with a refusal and ended with a recognition of what truly defines greatness. Not power or status, but humanity. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the city in hues of gold and amber, Lena and Alexander stood by the office window, the world outside bustling with life, unaware of the quiet transformation that had taken place within these walls. In that soft, glowing light, they were no longer CEO and assistant, not merely figures defined by hierarchy or titles. They were two lives connected by history, by empathy, and by the gentle, enduring power of human kindness. A narrator's voice, warm and reflective, would linger here. True greatness isn't measured by wealth or power, but by the connections we nurture and the kindness we extend. It is the small gestures, the unspoken acts of compassion that leave the deepest marks on hearts and lives. Life, as Lena and Alexander had discovered, often comes full circle. Moments once overlooked, the handshake refused, the shy boy at a neighborhood picnic, the family who offered a simple gift of care, can resurface in ways we cannot predict. It is a reminder that our actions, however small, ripple far beyond our immediate awareness. Every act of generosity, every ounce of empathy may one day find its way back, bridging worlds that once seemed irreconcilable. Viewers are invited to reflect. How many times have we dismissed someone as insignificant, unaware that they carry stories of courage, resilience, or wisdom? How often have we overlooked opportunities to offer kindness, thinking it too small to matter? In Lena and Alexander's story, the past and present intertwined, showing that even the coldest exterior can be softened by understanding, and that every human connection carries the potential to reshape lives. The camera would linger on a cinematic tableau. Lena and Alexander standing together, bathed in warm light, the city stretching endlessly beyond the glass. Their faces show quiet smiles, eyes reflecting gratitude, recognition, and the promise of a future where authority is tempered by humanity. Around them, shadows of the past, memories of childhood, family, and unnoticed kindness, fade into the light, a testament to the enduring impact of compassion. The final message is simple, yet profound. Greatness is not a measure of status, wealth, or recognition. It is the courage to act with empathy, the humility to acknowledge another's worth, and the vision to see that every life, no matter how seemingly ordinary, can leave an extraordinary imprint. As the screen slowly fades to black, the audience is left with a lingering warmth, a reflective pause, and a subtle invitation. Look for the small moments, the acts of kindness, the connections that may one day alter the course of someone's life, or your own. Because in the end, the measure of a life is not in titles or achievements, but in the hearts we touch and the humanity we preserve.